Hey guys, tonight we aren't scaling castle walls or diving to shipwrecks. No, we're on a different kind of expedition. We're going to trace the lineage of something so profoundly ordinary, so utterly forgettable, that your eyes have probably slid right over it a dozen times today, without registering its existence. We're talking about the door hinge, that simple, metallic, sometimes squeaky pivot point that separates one space from another. You are about to learn that this unassuming piece of hardware has a biography more dramatic than most royal families, a quiet evolution that has shaped human privacy, security, and architecture in ways you've never paused to consider. Imagine, for a moment, a world without that smooth, swinging motion. Every entrance and exit becomes a clumsy, heavy lift, a shove, a drag. Privacy is a myth. Security is a joke. You'd be heaving a massive, weighted slab every time you needed to pop to the loo in the middle of the night. A reality check for which, I can assure you, your sleepy, disoriented muscles are entirely unprepared. You probably wouldn't survive this simple daily chore with your sanity, or your toes, intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to drop a comment letting everyone know where in the world you're listening from and what the local time is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are not in your room anymore. The air has changed. It's thick, damp, and carries the rich, loamy scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. You're standing at the edge of a dense, primordial forest, the kind where the sunlight struggles to pierce the thick canopy overhead. It's the Neolithic period, around 10,000 years ago. The concept of a door as we know it is millennia away from being a twinkle in some architect's eye. But the need for a door, or at least for a barrier, is as old as humanity itself. Your first ancestors, huddled in the mouth of a cave or within a simple shelter of lashed-together branches, understood the fundamental desires to keep the elements out, to keep warmth in, and to keep whatever was prowling in the darkness from becoming an uninvited dinner guest. The problem was the entrance, a wide-open invitation to wind, rain, and predators. So, they dragged what was available into place: a large, flat stone, a heavy fallen log, a bundle of thorny brush. These were the first doors, and they were hopelessly, hilariously inefficient. To get in or out required a monumental effort, heaving, rolling, dragging. It was less an entrance and more a daily workout with a high risk of squashing something important. But then, someone, somewhere, had a moment of pure, lazy genius. They observed the natural world, the way a large leaf on a vine could be easily pushed aside, only to swing back into place. They noticed how a limb broken from a tree, but not fully detached, could pivot and move. This was the primordial spark. The first hinge wasn't forged, it was found. Imagine a supple, leathery animal hide, still heavy with fat and muscle, slung over the top of a crude doorway opening. One side is fixed, but the other hangs free. You don't lift it. You simply push it aside. It swings, it yields, it returns. It's not perfect, it probably smells terrible and does little for insulation, but it represents a quantum leap in convenience. This was the principle of the pivot, discovered through observation and a desire to make life just a little bit easier. Historians still argue whether this development was a deliberate, intentional innovation or simply a happy accident born of expediency, a fortunate byproduct of using whatever materials were on hand. We have evidence of slightly more advanced solutions from this era at the stunningly preserved Neolithic settlement of Skara Brae in Orkney, Scotland, dating back over 5,000 years. The stone huts feature something remarkable: stone doorways with carved pivot sockets. They'd take a slab of stone, the door, and carve the top and bottom into rounded tenons. Then, they'd carve corresponding indentations, the sockets, into the lintel stone above and the threshold stone below. The door slab could then be pivoted, rotating smoothly within these stone cups. It was a Stone Age bearing system. No metal, no complex tools, just intelligent stoneworking. It was quiet, effective, and would last for millennia, as indeed it has. This is our first mainstream historical fact: the use of pivot sockets, a hinge technology independent of metal, is one of humanity's oldest architectural tricks. And for our quirky tidbit, let's talk about what they used to lubricate these early stone hinges. You might guess animal fat, and you'd be partially right. But analysis of some remnants suggests something far more organic: a paste made from rendered animal fat mixed with crushed ash or fine sand to act as an abrasive grit. Not just a lubricant. The idea wasn't necessarily to make it slick, but to create a grinding paste that would, over time, wear down the stone-on-stone contact points into ever smoother, perfectly mated surfaces. They were manually lapping their hinges into perfection, a slow, generations-long process of breaking in a door. It's a wonderfully pragmatic and patient approach to solving a mechanical problem, a world away from our modern grab for a can of WD-40. So as you lie there, comfortable and secure, think of those first pivots. The swinging hide, the grinding stone. It was the quiet, almost imperceptible beginning of a revolution, one that would, quite literally, change the way we close ourselves off from the world. The air shifts again. The damp, earthy chill of the Neolithic forest is gone, replaced by a dry, oppressive heat that seems to radiate up from the very ground beneath you. The scent is no longer of decaying leaves, but of dust, animal dung, and something new, something acrid and metallic that catches in the back of your throat. You are standing at the outskirts of a sprawling, sun-baked city of mud brick, its ziggurat-stepped mountain scraping a pale, hazy sky. This is Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Some 5,000 years ago, here, humanity is beginning to organize itself on a monumental scale, and the simple, pragmatic solutions of the Stone Age are no longer enough. The doors here aren't just for keeping out the wind. They are for defining property, displaying status, and securing the wealth of kings and priests. The stone pivot, for all its ingenuity, has a flaw: friction. It grinds, it wears, it eventually fails under the weight of the massive, ornate doors demanded by this new, ambitious civilization. But the people here have discovered something that will change everything: metal. You hear it before you see it, a rhythmic, percussive clang that cuts through the murmur of the city. Following the sound, you find yourself at a rudimentary smithy, a open-faced workshop where a furnace roars, its heart a blistering orange glow. A smith, his body sheened in sweat and soot, is not working with the familiar, heavy stone. He's pulling a lump of malleable, glowing copper from the fire with long tongs. This is the dawn of the Copper Age, edging into the Bronze Age. He places the glowing metal on a stone anvil and begins to hammer it, not into a weapon or a tool, but into a long, thick, tapering pen. This is the moment. This is the birth of the first true metal hinge. It's not the complex, interleaved hinge we know today. It's a massive, forged metal pin. Its purpose? To replace the stone tenon. The door itself might still be wood or even reinforced mud brick, but its pivot point is now metal. The top of the door would have a metal cap or strap with a hole, through which this pin was driven, seating into a polished stone socket in the lintel. The bottom would have another pin rotating in a socket in the threshold. The difference is revolutionary. A stone-on-stone pivot grinds. A metal pin in a stone socket rotates. The friction is drastically reduced. The action is smoother, more reliable. Doors can be made larger and heavier because the pivot point is stronger. This is our mainstream historical fact. The Mesopotamians, specifically the Sumerians, were among the first to use forged metal pins as pivots, a fundamental advancement that allowed for the development of larger, more impressive gates and doors, a key feature of the monumental architecture that defines their civilization. You can see the evidence of this in the ruins of ancient Ur or Uruk, where the stone sockets remain, often worn smooth not by stone, but by the constant, smooth rotation of a metal pivot. Now for the quirky tidbit, the kind of detail that makes history feel tactile and strange. What did they use to keep these early metal hinges from squeaking? We know they valued smooth operation. The answer wasn't oil, which would attract dust and turn into a grinding paste. Instead, they used something they had in abundance: bitumen. This naturally occurring tar, found in seeps all over Mesopotamia, was their duct tape, their glue, their waterproofing agent, and their lubricant. They would heat the thick, black substance and carefully daub it into the socket before inserting the pin. As it cooled, it formed a slick, semi-solid coating that reduced friction and, crucially, deadened sound. A well-maintained Mesopotamian door would swing open not with a screech, but with a soft, almost silent, gritty smoothness. Imagine that: the gates of a mighty city, swinging open on a foundation of tar. Historians still argue whether this innovation was driven primarily by practical necessity, the need for bigger, better doors, or by the emerging concept of conspicuous consumption. Was the metal hinge merely a better tool? Or was it a status symbol? A door that swung smoothly and silently, operated by a technology as modern and magical as metalworking, would have been a powerful display of wealth and power. It said, "We command the very elements. We have tamed fire and earth to create motion itself." It was a quiet, daily reminder of the hierarchy that structured this new urban world. The commoner might still have a hide flap or a dragging stone slab, but the elite had the silent, swinging door. So as the rhythmic hammering of the smith fades into the hum of your fan, think of that first metal pin. It was more than a piece of hardware. It was a statement, a turning point in every sense of the word, setting a new standard for convenience, security, and quiet authority that would swing its way across the ancient world. The dry, dusty heat of Mesopotamia melts away, replaced by a different kind of warmth, the intense, baking, sun-scorched air of the Nile Valley. The scent of bitumen and dust is gone, overpowered by the smell of baking bread, of the Nile's fertile mud, and of vast quantities of cut stone. You are no longer in a mud-brick city. You are standing in the shadow of impossible geometry, before the towering, flawless limestone face of a pyramid. This is Egypt, and here, architecture has ceased to be merely functional and has become an act of near-divine ambition. The Mesopotamians mastered the metal pin, but the Egyptians faced a different challenge altogether: scale. Their doors weren't just for houses or city gates. They were for temples to immortal gods and tombs for eternal pharaohs. These doors needed to be as monumental, as imposing, and as permanent as the structures they protected, and so, they turned away from metal and wood and back to the very essence of their civilization: stone. You are looking at the entrance to a vast temple, not at the grand, public façade, but at a massive, secondary gate leading into the inner sanctum. The door itself is gone, likely plundered millennia ago for its valuable wood or metal reinforcements. But what remains tells the entire story. Carved directly into the granite threshold and the massive lintel above are two perfect, polished, bowl-shaped depressions. These are the pivot sockets, but they are not designed for a metal pin attached to a wooden door. They are designed to receive the weight of something far more immense, a door made entirely of stone. Imagine a slab of granite, taller than two people and as thick as your torso. Its craftsmen would have painstakingly carved two rounded protrusions, one at the top and one at the bottom of the door slab. These tenons would then be set into the waiting stone sockets above and below. The entire weight of this monolithic door, thousands of pounds of solid rock, would be balanced on that bottom pivot, a perfect sphere of granite rotating in a perfect granite cup. The engineering is breathtaking in its simplicity and audacity. This is our mainstream historical fact. The ancient Egyptians perfected the stone pivot hinge to operate massive, monolithic stone doors, primarily for tombs and temples, creating entrances that were as much psychological barriers as physical ones. The precision required is staggering. The stone spheres and their sockets had to be carved with near-perfect geometry and polished to an almost glassy smoothness to allow movement. A miscalculation of a millimeter, a slight imperfection in the polish, and the door would grind to a permanent halt, sealed shut by its own immense weight. The world's oldest functional stone door is believed to be in the tomb of Cyrus the Great in Persia, but the concept was mastered millennia earlier by the Egyptians. Walking up to such a door, you wouldn't even think to push it. Its sheer mass would suggest a movability, permanence. Yet, with a correctly balanced design, a single person could, with a firm push, set thousands of pounds of stone rotating smoothly and almost silently on its stone bearings. Now for the quirky, almost absurd tidbit. How did they manage the final installation? How do you lift a multi-ton block of carved granite and precisely lower its pivot tenon into a socket no wider than a dinner plate? The answer involves one of history's oldest and most reliable technologies: mud ramps and manpower. They would build a steep ramp of packed earth and sand up to the doorway. The stone door would be dragged on sledges up this ramp, positioned above the threshold. Then, with an army of laborers using levers and ropes, they would painstakingly raise one side of the slab, incrementally, inserting wooden blocks underneath to hold it aloft. In a process called cribbing, they would raise it just high enough to clear the socket. Then, they'd begin the delicate process of lowering it, shifting its position micro-inch by micro-inch, until the rounded pivot at the bottom hovered directly over the socket. Then, they'd let it drop. The final, heart-stopping moment would be the clunk of stone meeting stone. If it was perfectly aligned, it would seat itself. If it wasn't, the door could crack, or worse, shatter the socket in the threshold, rendering the entire doorway and years of work useless. It was a high-stakes game of architectural operation. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these massive stone doors was practical security or symbolic permanence. Were they meant to actually deter tomb robbers, or were they a final, physical statement about the eternal, unmovable nature of the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife? A wooden door, even with a metal lock, could be burned or broken. A stone door, once closed, was a part of the tomb itself, a seamless barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Its very immovability was the point. It was less a door and more a permanent seal. So as you lie there, think of the silence of a deep tomb, the coolness of the stone, and the incredible feat of engineering that allowed a single, massive slab to swing shut for the last time, sealing in its occupant not with a slam, but with the soft, final, grinding sigh of stone on stone, a sound meant to echo for eternity. The immense, silent weight of Egyptian stone evaporates, replaced by a cacophony of sound and purpose. The air is no longer still and sacred. It's filled with the shouts of men, the clatter of tools, and the scent of pine, olive wood, and hot metal. You reign no longer in the static grandeur of a tomb, but on a sun-drenched hillside in the Greco-Roman world, at a bustling fabrico workshop where the business of building an empire is underway. The Egyptians sought permanence and silence, but the Greeks and Romans had a different, more dynamic need: efficiency, strength, and application on a massive, imperial scale. Their hinges weren't just for doors. They were for the machinery of conquest and the infrastructure of daily life, and they found their perfect expression not in a pin or a pivot, but in a long, strong strip of bronze or iron, the strap hinge. You're watching a blacksmith, his muscles corded from years at the forge, hammering out a length of iron into a long, tapering strip. At one end, he'll forge a circular eye. At the other, he'll punch a series of holes. This is the heart of the new design. One of these straps gets fixed to the door frame, its eye forming a perfect, reinforced socket. The other gets fixed to the door itself. Then, a forged metal pin is driven through the overlapping eyes, creating a robust, external pivot point. This is the strap hinge, and its advantages are immediately obvious. It's incredibly strong, able to support immense weight because its load is distributed along the length of the strap, which is nailed or bolted securely to the wood. It's repairable. If a pin wears out, you forge a new one. If a strap cracks, you replace it without having to dismantle the entire door or chisel out a stone socket. It's versatile. You can make them long and elegant for a temple door or short and brutally strong for a siege engine. This is our mainstream historical fact. The Greeks and Romans perfected and proliferated the use of the metal strap hinge, a design so effective and durable that it remained the dominant form of hinge for over 1,000 years straight through the Middle Ages. You can see them on everything from the doors of the Pantheon to the chests carried by Roman legionaries. They were a hallmark of Roman engineering pragmatism, but their application went far beyond simple doors. Look over there. In the corner of the workshop, a team of engineers is assembling an onager, a massive Roman catapult, and there, at the heart of its throwing arm, is a massive, heavy-duty strap hinge. Its pin as thick as your wrist. The entire violent motion of the machine, the wrenching pullback, the sudden, explosive release, all pivots on that one crucial hinge. The success of an assault, the breaching of a wall, could literally hinge on the quality of the smith's workmanship. Now for the quirky, practical tidbit. All that metal on metal, under tremendous stress, creates friction and wear. The Romans, practical to their core, had a lubricant of choice for these high-stress applications. A paste made from animal fat, beeswax, and lead dust. Yes, lead. They would grind lead into a fine powder and mix it into the grease. The lead acted as a solid lubricant under extreme pressure, much like graphite does today. It was effective, readily available, and utterly toxic, though of course they had no idea of the latter. A Roman armorer maintaining a ballista would be casually slathering a lead-based paste onto the hinges, unknowingly poisoning himself and the environment in the name of keeping the machinery of empire running smoothly. It's a darkly ironic footnote to their engineering prowess. Historians still argue whether the Romans innovated significantly in hinge design or were simply brilliant adopters and perfecters of existing technology, like the strap hinge, which had earlier precursors elsewhere. Did they invent it? Or did they just do what they always did? See a good idea, standardize it, and produce it in such vast quantities and to such a reliable standard that it became synonymous with their civilization? The evidence points toward the latter. Their genius was in mass production and application. They established fabrica across the empire, producing standardized hardware nails, hinges, locks that allowed a legion in Britannia to repair a gate with the exact same hinge used on a temple in Syria. This interoperability was a silent force multiplier, so as the sounds of the workshop fade, replaced by the quiet of your room. Think of that strap hinge. It was more than a piece of hardware. It was a symbol of a systematized, scalable world. A world where everything, from your front door to the engine of war that might break it down, swung on the same reliable principle. The organized clamor of the Roman workshop dissolves into a different kind of din, a deeper, more resonant sound that seems to cling to the cold, damp air. The scent of hot metal and pine is still here, but it's now layered with the pungent smell of wood smoke, burning horn, and the unmistakable, iron-rich tang of a forge running day and night. You've stepped out of the classical world and into the heart of the Dark Ages. Standing just outside a medieval blacksmith shop, a dark, soot-stained hut attached to the manor of a local lord, the systematic mass production of Rome is a distant memory. Here, now, every single piece of hardware is a unique, hand-forged creation, and the hinge is about to undergo a transformation. It's no longer just a functional pivot. In an age of constant threat, it becomes a key component of fortification, and in an age of faith, it becomes a canvas for art. You duck inside the smithy, the heat from the central forge immediately pushing back the chill. The smith, a man whose value to the community is immeasurable, is not just a laborer. He's a magician, an alchemist who turns raw earth into tools, weapons, and security. He's working on a hinge for the manor's new main gate. But this is no simple Roman strap. He's forging something far more ambitious, a massive, black iron hinge whose long arms, once nailed to the gate, will stretch across the wood like the skeletal fingers of some protective demon. This is the age of the monumental hinge, where function and form collide with brute force. The design is still fundamentally the strap hinge, but it's been exaggerated, strengthened, and embellished. Its purpose is twofold. First, to bear the colossal weight of a gate designed to withstand a battering ram, and second, to reinforce the door itself. These long iron straps, often arranged in an H or X pattern, bind the planks of the door together, making it resistant to being splintered or hacked apart. The hinge is no longer just a pivot, it is armor plating for the door. This is our mainstream historical fact. During the medieval period, particularly in Europe, hinges evolved from simple functional objects into massive, over-engineered works of both art and fortification, with blacksmiths creating elaborate designs like the strap-hand arrow, the butterfly, and the iconic H-hinge to strengthen gates and display the wealth and power of their owners. The hinge was a statement. A peasant's hut might have a simple crudely forged hook and band hinge, but a lord's manor, a monastery, or a cathedral would have hinges that were architectural features, in their own right, sprawling across the wood in intricate geometric patterns that spoke of the smith's incredible skill and the owner's immense prestige. Now for the wonderfully quirky tidbit. How did these smiths achieve such intricate, symmetrical designs without blueprints or precise measuring tools? The answer lies in a tool you'd never expect, a sheet of cured leather. They would soak the leather and then press it into a bed of fine ash or sand beside the forge, creating a soft, malleable mold. Then, using a stick or their finger, they'd sketch the full-scale design of the hinge directly into this impression. This leather template was their blueprint. They'd lay hot, half-forged iron strips onto the drawing to check their progress, bending and hammering until the metal matched the lines in the ash. It was a low-tech, brilliantly effective method for translating a complex design from the mind's eye into red-hot iron. This process was often surrounded by superstition. A smith might have a lucky leather template or believe that a design drawn under a full moon would result in a stronger hinge. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for these incredibly elaborate hinges was truly defensive or merely ostentatious. Was the goal to actually make the door stronger, or was it to project an image of impregnable strength? A gate covered in a web of thick, menacing iron certainly looks impenetrable, and that psychological deterrent was arguably just as valuable as the physical reinforcement it provided. It was a form of architectural intimidation. The message was clear. Behind this door lies something so valuable it is protected by a small fortune in forged iron and the skill of a master craftsman. Do not even think of trying to force your way in. So as the hammer falls in the smoky darkness, each ring a testament to skill and survival, think of that hinge. It was more than a pivot. It was a promise of security, a badge of status, and a piece of art born from fire, fear, and an astonishing amount of craftsmanship. It was the thing that stood between the warmth and safety of the hearth and the cold, unpredictable darkness of the world outside. The sooty, intimate heat of the blacksmith's forge is swept away by a sudden, profound coolness. The air is still, heavy, and smells of cold stone, old incense, and the faint, sweet note of beeswax from countless votive candles. The sounds of hammering are gone, replaced by a silence so deep it feels like a physical presence, broken only by the distant, echoing footfall of a monk shuffling through a shadowy transept. You have left the world of manorial fortifications and entered the realm of the divine. You are standing in the nave of a massive Romanesque church, your neck craned, staring not at the altar, but at the towering, banded oak doors behind you, and crawling over them, spanning their immense height and width, is something that defies mere function. It is a web of black iron so complex, so audaciously elaborate, that it looks less like hardware, and more like a frozen bolt of lightning, or the veins of some colossal, petrified leaf. This is the medieval church door hinge, and it represents the absolute zenith of the blacksmith's art, a testament to faith written in wrought iron. You approach the door, feeling dwarfed not just by its size, but by the sheer ambition of its ironwork. These hinges aren't just straps, they are full-scale architectural features. The main strap might be an inch thick and a foot wide where it wraps round the door's edge, tapering as it stretches across the wood, splitting into branches curling back on itself in spirals, and volutes terminating in stylized floral motifs or the faces of grotesque beasts. This is where the hinge transcends its purpose. Yes, its primary job is still structural, to hold up a door that might weigh over a ton, and to prevent the oak planks from warping or sagging over centuries. But its secondary job is pedagogical. In an age of widespread illiteracy, the church was a picture book, and every surface told a story. The carvings on the tympanum above the door showed the Last Judgment. The stained glass windows depicted saints and martyrs. And the hinges? They were a warning and a welcome all at once. Their intricate, fearsome beauty was meant to inspire awe, to signal that you were leaving the mundane world and entering a space that was protected by a power far greater than any feudal lord. This is our mainstream historical fact. During the Romanesque and early Gothic periods, particularly in France and England, church door hinges became incredibly elaborate works of art, with master blacksmiths creating designs that covered significant portions of the door surface, serving both a critical structural function and a symbolic one representing the might and majesty of the church. The most famous examples, like those at the Notre Dame de Paris before the fire, or the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, are masterpieces of metallurgy, requiring countless hours of painstaking forge welding, scrolling, and chisel cutting to create their intricate patterns. Now for the quirky, almost alchemical tidbit. These hinges, today, are a monotonous black, but they weren't always that way. There's compelling evidence that many were originally gilded or painted. How? They used a technique called fire gilding. They decreate an amalgam by grinding gold into a powder and mixing it with mercury to form a silvery paste. This paste would then be carefully painted onto the cleaned iron surface of the hinge. The door would be opened, and a carefully controlled fire would be built near it. The heat would vaporize the mercury, a process that released incredibly toxic fumes, leaving behind a thin, brilliant layer of pure gold bonded to the iron. Imagine that, the morning sun striking the great west doors of a cathedral, causing the vast, web-like hinges to blaze with golden light, a dazzling, heavenly spectacle designed to overwhelm the senses of the approaching worshipper. The cost in gold was immense, but the cost in the health of the artisans, breathing mercury vapor, was undoubtedly higher. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for this extravagance was spiritual instruction, sheer ostentatious display of the church's wealth, or a more pragmatic form of psychological defense. A cathedral was often the richest building in any region, a repository of gold, silver, and priceless relics. A set of doors guarded by what looked like a divine, fiery net of gilded iron might give even the most avaricious thief pause, believing the entrance to be protected by magic as much as by metal. Was it art, religion, or security theater? It was likely all three, a potent combination designed to command obedience and awe from all who approached. So as you lie in the dark, think of those immense doors, think of the silence inside, broken only by prayer, and the silent, screaming effort of the smiths who, centuries ago, turned tons of iron into something delicate, something terrifying, and something beautiful, all to make a point about what lay on the other side of the pivot. The profound, cool silence of the Gothic cathedral dissolves not into noise, but into a different kind of quiet. It's a living, breathing stillness. The air is now soft and carries the delicate scent of hinoki cypress, damp moss, and distant rain. The crushing weight of stone and iron is gone. You are kneeling on a woven tatami mat, the smooth, earthy reeds firm beneath you. You are in a traditional Japanese interior during the Heian period, and the very concept of a door is about to be redefined. In the West, the hinge was evolving into a statement of power, an external exoskeleton of strength. But here, in the East, engineering took a different path, one of subtlety, elegance, and hidden intelligence. The goal wasn't to dominate the entrance with iron muscle, but to make it disappear entirely, to create a seamless, fluid transition between spaces. Here, the hinge doesn't announce itself, it conceals itself. Before you is not a door, but a shurji, a translucent screen of fine paper stretched over a delicate wooden lattice. To your side is a fusuma, a heavier, opaque sliding panel often adorned with serene landscape paintings. You reach out and push the fusuma. It doesn't swing, it glides. There is no creak of metal, no protest of weight. It moves with a whisper soft rustle, a sound so gentle it feels like a secret. This is the pinnacle of the pivot hinge, perfected to a degree of effortless elegance that would baffle a medieval European blacksmith. The magic is all in the hardware you cannot see. Along the top and bottom of the panel, craftsmen have meticulously carved narrow, continuous channels. Into these channels, they set perfectly shaped wooden runners. The fusuma isn't hanging on straps or pins, it is suspended, its entire weight balanced on these wooden tracks. The pivot is now a continuous, linear bearing system, hidden from view. This is our mainstream historical fact. Japanese craftsmen, particularly from the Heian period onward, developed highly sophisticated and almost entirely hidden pivot and track systems for their sliding doors fusuma and screens shurji, emphasizing seamless integration, quiet operation, and a harmonious aesthetic that contrasted sharply with the external, decorative hardware of the West. The entire design philosophy was different. A Western door was a barrier, a definitive closed or open state. A Japanese sliding panel was a modulator of space, allowing for infinite gradations of openness and privacy, of light and shadow. The architecture itself became fluid, and the humble, hidden pivot was the key that unlocked this possibility. Now for the quirky, wonderfully precise tidbit. How did they ensure these wooden tracks and runners operated with such silent, frictionless perfection? They didn't have synthetic lubricants. Instead, they used something entirely natural and seasonal. The wax from the Japanese sumac tree, harvested in autumn, refined, and applied in tiny, careful amounts to the wooden runners. This natural wax provided a slick, clean coating that reduced wear and kept the operation whisper quiet. But there was a catch. The wax was susceptible to dust, so a key part of the household routine often assigned to children was the meticulous cleaning of the overhead kamoi lintel and the floor-mounted shiki, threshold tracks with a soft damp cloth before a fresh, almost invisible application of wax. The maintenance of the hinge was a quiet, meditative act of domestic care, a world away from the lead-based pastes and toxic mercury gilding of the West. Historians still argue whether this radical divergence in design was purely a cultural, an aesthetic choice or a deeply pragmatic response to the environment. Was the sliding door and its hidden pivot a philosophical preference for ambiguity and flow? Or was it a brilliant adaptation to the constant threat of earthquakes? A heavy, swinging door on metal hinges could become a deadly, unpredictable pendulum during a tremor. A lightweight sliding panel, riding in its wooden track, was far less dangerous and less likely to jam if the frame of the building shifted slightly. It was a safer, more resilient technology for a volatile landscape. The elegance, then, might have been a fortunate byproduct of sheer practicality. So as you lie there, imagine the gentle slide of a fusuma. The way it transforms a room without a sound. It represents a different kind of strength, not the strength to resist, but the strength to adapt, to yield, and to move with a quiet, effortless grace. It is a reminder that the most sophisticated solution isn't always the loudest, or the most visible. Sometimes, it's the one you never see at all. The soft, whispering slide of the fusuma fades into memory, replaced by a new sound, the precise, rhythmic scratch of a drafting stylus on vellum. The air loses its subtle scent of cypress and wax, gaining instead the smell of linseed oil, freshly cut oak, and the faint, exciting odor of ozone from a distant thunderstorm. You have been transported from the serene, minimalist world of the East to the intellectual and artistic ferment of the European Renaissance. The mindset has shifted. This is no longer an age content with brute strength or divine intimidation. It is an age of inquiry, of science, of looking at the classical world not as a lost relic, but as a blueprint for a new human-centric future. And the hinge, that workhorse of architecture, is about to be re-examined, refined, and ultimately hidden away. The goal is no longer to display the iron, but to conceal it, to create a seamless, flawless surface where form follows function with mathematical precision. You are in the workshop of a master cabinet maker in Florence. The room is lit by the clear, northern light favored by artists. The blacksmith, once the star of this show, is now a collaborator, taking precise instructions from the designer. On the bench before the craftsman lies not a massive gate hinge, but a new, ingenious invention, the butt hinge. It consists of two narrow metal leaves, each drilled with small, neat holes for screws. The secret is the knuckle, the hollow cylindrical core where the two leaves meet. When the leaves are set into the edge of the door and the door jamb, the knuckle is hidden from view. A single, discrete pin is slipped down through the knuckle, connecting the two halves. When the door is closed, the entire mechanism vanishes. All you see is a perfect, unbroken line where the door meets the frame. This is a revolution in aesthetics. The hinge is no longer a decorative feature. It is an invisible servant. It represents a new desire for clean lines, uncluttered spaces, and a focus on the material itself, the rich grain of the wood, rather than the hardware holding it together. This is our mainstream historical fact. The Renaissance period, with its revival of classical ideals and emphasis on proportion and hidden geometry, saw the development and popularization of the butt hinge, a design that was set into the door and frame itself, rendering it virtually invisible when closed and allowing for a much cleaner, more refined aesthetic in furniture and interior doors. This was hardware for the emerging merchant and intellectual classes, who wanted to display their taste and wealth through subtlety and craftsmanship, not ironclad brute force. Leonardo da Vinci himself sketched numerous designs for hinges and pivoting mechanisms, his notebooks filled with ideas for improving efficiency and concealing moving parts. Now for the quirky, superstitious tidbit that always seems to linger in the shadows of progress. With the new butt hinge came a new problem. The pin, that small, vital metal rod that held everything together, had a habit of working itself loose over time, dropping out and getting lost. The solution: a dab of molten beeswax applied to the top of the pin once it was inserted, sealing it in place. But for many, simple wax wasn't enough. There was a widespread belief, a holdover from more mystical times, that a hinge pin that fell out on its own was an ominous sign of bad luck, a breach in the household's protection, or even an invitation for malicious spirits to enter. To counter this, some craftsmen would inscribe tiny, protective symbols or sigils onto the head of the pin before sealing it with wax: a cross, a simple geometric pattern, or an ancient charm symbol. It was a silent, secret spell for domestic security, hidden inside the most modern hardware of the age. Historians still argue whether the driving force behind the adoption of the butt hinge was truly a newfound love for classical purity, or something far more pragmatic: the rising cost of high-quality wrought iron. A massive, decorative strap hinge for a church door could consume hundreds of pounds of expensively worked metal. A set of subtle but hinges for a fine cabinet used a fraction of the material. Was the shift to hidden hinges, then, partly an economic decision dressed up in the fashionable language of Renaissance humanism and design? It's a compelling debate. The result, regardless of motive, was a fundamental shift in our relationship with the hinge. It moved from being a celebrated, external symbol of strength to an invisible, internal mechanism of convenience. It became something you were never meant to think about. So as the cabinet maker carefully taps the inscribed pin into the knuckle and seals it with wax, think of that moment. It's the moment the hinge begins to disappear, retreating into the background of our lives, becoming the silent, efficient, and forgettable marvel that it is today. The refined, intellectual quiet of the Renaissance workshop evaporates, replaced by a more rustic, urgent symphony of sounds. The scratch of a stylus is gone, overpowered by the roar of a different kind of fire, the ringing of a heavier hammer, and the crisp, splitting sound of greenwood being hewn. The air is thick with the smell of raw timber, charcoal, and the sweat of hard, unending labor. You have crossed an ocean. You are now on the edge of a vast, seemingly endless forest in colonial America. The philosophical ideals of the old world are a luxury that cannot be afforded here. Survival is the only philosophy that matters, and in this new world, the hinge must once again change. It must be pragmatic, durable, and able to be made by a single pair of hands with limited resources. The age of the blacksmith, momentarily sidelined by the Renaissance designer, is back with a vengeance. He is no longer an artist or an alchemist. He is the most important man in the settlement. You are standing in a clearing, watching a blacksmith, perhaps the only one for 50 miles, set up his forge. His anvil is set on a massive, freshly cut stump. His bellows are hand-sewn leather. His raw material isn't carefully refined bar stock. It's whatever scrap metal made the voyage from Europe, or if he's truly on his own, bog iron harvested from the nearby streams and smelted in a makeshift furnace. A settler approaches him with a request. He's built a cabin. He's hung a door. But it's just resting on leather straps, a temporary measure. He needs real hardware. The smith nods. He knows the design by heart. He fires his forge and pulls out a length of iron. He doesn't sketch a design in ash. He hammers it out, by eye and by feel, into a specific, iconic shape, the HL hinge. It's a strap hinge, but its end is not pointed or scrolled. It is hammered flat and then cut and bent at a right angle, forming a perfect letter H or L. The long arm gets nailed to the door, providing support along its vertical edge. The short, right angle flange gets nailed over the face of the door, binding the planks together and providing immense resistance against the door being forced inward. It is brutally simple, incredibly strong, and unmistakably American. This is our mainstream historical fact. In the American colonial period, the most common, an iconic hinge was the hand-forged H or HL hinge, a rugged, practical design that provided significant structural reinforcement to plank doors and could be produced by a village blacksmith with minimal tools, making it a staple of early American architecture. You can still see them on preserved colonial buildings and historical reconstructions today. They weren't meant to be pretty. They were meant to work and to last. They were a declaration of self-reliance, a piece of hardware forged from the very wilderness it was meant to provide a barrier against. Now, for the quirky, personal tidbit that makes history feel human. These hinges were made one at a time, by individual smiths, and each smith had his own little signature, a trademark that had nothing to do with branding and everything to do with muscle memory. The most common was the hammer finish. The smith wouldn't file or grind the hinge smooth. He'd leave the surface pocked with the deliberate, overlapping marks of his hammer. To the untrained eye, they all look the same, but to a historian, each pattern is as unique as a fingerprint. The size and shape of the hammer face, the angle of the blow, the rhythm of the strike sit all created a distinct texture. You can look at an HL hinge on a 250-year-old cabin in Vermont, and another on a tavern in Virginia, and, if you know what to look for, tell they were made by different hands. Even more intimate, sometimes a smith, when punching the nail holes, would do it off-center, or in a slightly irregular pattern. These weren't mistakes, they were the subtle, unconscious signatures of a craftsman working quickly to meet demand, leaving his permanent, if invisible, mark on the frontier. Historians still argue whether the pervasive use of the HL hinge was purely a practical choice or, if it carried a subtle, unintended cultural statement. Did its rugged, exposed, and unforgiving aesthetic so different from the hidden but hinges of European sophistication consciously or unconsciously reflect a new colonial identity, one that valued strength, practicality, and visible honesty over refined elegance and hidden mechanisms? Was a door with HL hinges saying, "What you see is what you get. We are sturdy, plain, and strong," in contrast to a European door that might have said, "We are refined, elegant, and our strength is discreet"? It's a fascinating layer to add to a simple piece of hardware. The hinge becomes a cultural artifact, a metal expression of a burgeoning national character. So as the smith's hammer falls in the clearing, each ring echoing into the vast, unknown woods, think of that HL hinge. It wasn't just holding a door shut, it was holding a way of life together, one stout, hand-forged nail at a time. The solitary, rhythmic hammering of the colonial blacksmith is suddenly drowned out by a sound so immense, so all-consuming, that it vibrates through the very floor beneath your feet. It's a deep, rhythmic, shuddering thump-clank hiss that repeats over and over, a mechanical heartbeat of terrifying power. The scent of the forge is still here, but it's now mixed with the stench of coal smoke, steam, and hot mineral oil. The intimate, hand-sewn world of the colonial craftsman has vanished. You are now standing on the grimy, iron-grated viewing platform of a factory in Birmingham, England. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, the world has been hooked up to a machine, and everything is about to change forever. The hinge, that object once shaped by a single pair of hands, is about to be borne by the thousands, each one an identical twin to the last. The age of individuality is over. The age of standardization has begun. You look down onto the factory floor. It's a vision of hellish efficiency. A massive steam engine, its great iron beam pumping up and down like the piston of a god, powers a line of monstrous machines through a labyrinth of spinning leather belts. In the center of it all is a drop stamp. A worker, his face smudged with grease, feeds a long, thin strip of red-hot iron into a set of guides. Above him, a massive, weighted die is hoisted up by the machine. It pauses for a second at the apex, then drops with the force of a meteor. Crack boom. The sound is deafening. The die hits the glowing iron, and in that instant, it is no longer a strip. It is a perfectly formed hinge leaf, its screw holes already punched, its knuckle already formed. It is flung out onto a conveyor, sizzling as it hits a cooling bath of oil. Another strip is fed in. The die rises and falls. Crack boom. Another hinge appears. The process is hypnotic, terrifying, and awe-inspiring. A single blacksmith might have forged a dozen hinges in a day. This machine spits out a dozen in a minute. This is our mainstream historical fact. The Industrial Revolution, with the invention of powered stamping and pressing machinery in the 18th and 19th centuries, revolutionized hinge manufacturing, moving it from small, hand-forged batches to mass production. This allowed for the standardization of hardware, drastically reduced costs, and made metal hinges affordable and available to the average household. For the first time in history, the hinge was democratized. It was no longer a sign of wealth or a testament to a single smith's skill. It was a cheap, reliable, and utterly anonymous commodity. You could now buy a bag of hinges from a catalog, and everyone would be exactly the same, capable of fitting any door of a standard size. This interoperability was the silent engine behind the explosive growth of cities and suburbs. It allowed for the rapid, repetitive construction of housing on a scale never before imagined. Now for the quirky, human tidbit that emerges from the mechanized chaos. With this new, high-speed production came a new kind of industrial injury, so common it earned its own nickname, hinge finger. The drop stamp was an unforgiving machine. The worker's job was to feed the metal strip in and pull his hand back at the exact right moment. Fatigue, distraction, or a misfire in the machine's rhythm could be catastrophic. Hinge finger was the grim result, the loss of a finger, or several. To the crushing force of the die, it was a brutal price paid for progress. Factory owners, under pressure to maintain output, didn't stop the machines. Instead, they developed the first rudimentary safety guards, not out of compassion, but to prevent the costly delays caused by a mangled worker having to be extracted from the line. The evolution of workplace safety, in a small, dark way, is tied to the mass production of the humble door hinge. Historians still argue whether this shift to mass production was an unalloyed good, a triumph of accessibility and progress, or a profound cultural loss. Did the world gain more from every door having a reliable, affordable hinge than it lost in the de-skilling of the blacksmith and the anonymity of the object? Was the trade-off worth it? The handmade HL hinge bore the unique mark of its maker. The stamped hinge bore only the number of the die that made it. One speaks of a human hand, the other speaks of a system. This debate lies at the heart of the Industrial Revolution itself, and it's a debate that swings on the pivot of this most ordinary of objects. So as the relentless thump-clank hiss of the stamping press fades into the background hum of your fan, think of that moment. It was the moment the hinge disappeared from our consciousness, not through elegant design, but through sheer, overwhelming abundance. It became so common, so cheap, and so reliable that we finally, completely, stopped having to think about it at all. The deafening, rhythmic thunder of the industrial stamping press fades, but it isn't replaced by silence. Instead, a new sound emerges, the furious, frantic scratching of a pen on patent application forms, the rustle of legal documents, and the outraged shouts of inventors accusing each other of heft. The smell of coal smoke and hot oil is now layered with the scent of ink, cheap paper, and the nervous sweat of men who believe they are on the cusp of a fortune. You have moved from the factory floor to the patent office and the courtroom. The Industrial Revolution made hinges cheap and plentiful, but it also ignited a new fever, the desire to improve the hinge, to patent the improvement, and to sue anyone who dared to imitate it. The age of mass production has given way to the patent era, a bizarre and often vicious period of legal warfare over fractions of an inch and degrees of spring tension. The hinge is no longer just a piece of hardware. It is intellectual property, a potential gold mine, and a cause for litigation. You are sitting in a stuffy, wood-paneled courtroom in the late 19th century. On one side of the room sits a prim, well-dressed inventor from Philadelphia, clutching a diagram. On the other side slouches a brash, confident factory owner from Connecticut, smirking. Between them, on the evidence table, lies the subject of their bitter dispute, a door hinge. But not just any hinge. This one has a small, cleverly concealed coil spring tucked inside its knuckle. It's a spring hinge, designed to automatically close a door. The Philadelphia man claims he invented it. The Connecticut man claims the design is obvious and that his own slightly different version doesn't infringe on the patent. The arguments are mind-numbingly technical. The lawyers debate the precise angle of the spring's tension, the metallurgical composition of the wire, the exact number of degrees the door is meant to swing before the mechanism engages. The future of entire small businesses hinges on the outcome of this absurdly specific debate. This was the reality of the Gilded Age, where innovation was as much about lawyers as it was about inventors. This is our mainstream historical fact. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw an explosion of patent applications for hinge improvements, particularly for spring-loaded and self-closing designs, leading to frequent and fiercely contested legal battles over intellectual property that shaped the modern hardware industry and consolidated manufacturing under a few large patent-holding companies. Giants like Stanley Works grew not just by making good tools, but by aggressively acquiring patents and litigating to protect their market share. The simple act of a door closing itself became a multi-million-dollar business. Now for the quirky, wonderfully obsessive tidbit that these patent wars produced. One of the biggest challenges with the spring hinge was finding the right material. For the spring itself, it had to be strong, flexible, and resistant to fatigue. One inventor, an eccentric from Ohio named Elmer P. Higgins, became convinced the ideal material wasn't metal at all. After years of experimentation, he filed a patent in 1897 for a spring hinge that used a carefully selected and treated strand of whale baleen. That's right, the keratinous filter-feeding system of a baleen whale. He claimed that when boiled in a specific salt solution and cured under pressure, baleen had a memory and springiness superior to the best steel wire. He produced prototypes. They apparently worked for a time, but the supply chain was problematic. The hinge required the harvesting of a specific species of whale, and the material's properties could vary wildly from one whale to the next. His patent was granted, but it was utterly impractical and was soon buried by the tide of cheaper, more reliable steel coil springs. But for a brief, bizarre moment in history, the automatic closing of a screen door was intimately connected to the fate of the great whales. Historians still argue whether this frantic period of patenting and litigation ultimately spurred innovation or stifled it. Did the threat of a lawsuit encourage inventors to create truly novel solutions, or did it simply create a minefield that discouraged small-time tinkerers from even trying? There's evidence for both. The patent system protected inventors, allowing them to profit from their ideas, but it also allowed large corporations to amass arsenals of patents, not to use them, but to block competitors from entering the market, a practice known as patent trolling that was alive and well even then. The humble hinge found itself at the center of this fundamental tension between the right to own an idea and the desire to see progress flourish. So as the gavel falls in the stuffy courtroom, think of that spring, coiled tight inside its knuckle. It's not just under mechanical tension, it's under legal tension. To a symbol of an age where every little improvement was a potential battle, and where the quietest part of your house became a surprisingly noisy arena for human ambition, greed, and legal brilliance. The musty, tense atmosphere of the courtroom dissipates, replaced by a new, almost sterile smell, the sharp, clean odor of machine oil, hot metal, and something else. Something you can't quite place, a faint, ozonic tang, like the air after a lightning strike. The sounds of legal arguing are gone, superseded by the high-pitched, precise whine of a power saw cutting through metal and the low hum of a vast, electrified factory. You have stepped out of the contentious past and into the gleaming, optimistic mid-20th century. The world wars are over, the future is here, and it is made of new, miraculous materials. The hinge, having survived the patent wars, is about to undergo its most radical physical transformation since the first metal pin replaced stone. The age of iron and steel is being joined by the age of stainless steel, aluminum, and even plastic. The goal is no longer just strength or self-closing action. It is corrosion resistance, lightness, and a new, space-age aesthetic. You are walking through a spotless, well-lit manufacturing facility in the 1950s. The massive, thunderous drop stamps are still here, but they are now joined by new, more precise machines. Over there, a press is stamping out hinge leaves not from black iron, but from a shiny, silvery metal that seems to glow under the factory lights. This is stainless steel, an alloy of iron, chromium, and nickel. Its revolutionary property is that it doesn't rust. For the first time, a hinge could be used in a bathroom, a kitchen, or on a boat without eventually succumbing to ugly, weakening red oxidation. It was a game changer for both function and form. Next to it, another machine is extruding long, lightweight hinges from an aluminum alloy, perfect for the cabinets of the sleek, modern homes being built in the new suburbs. And in a corner that would have made every blacksmith from history stare in disbelief, A newfangled injection molding machine is humming away, squeezing out hinges made entirely of nylon. These plastic hinges won't corrode, they won't squeak, and they're cheap as chips. They're being used on everything from toy boxes to the interior doors of cheap furniture. The very definition of what a hinge could be made of was exploding. This is our mainstream historical fact. The mid-20th century saw the introduction of new materials like stainless steel, aluminum, and various plastics, nylon, PVC, into hinge manufacturing, which drastically expanded their applications into moist environments, reduced weight, and allowed for cheaper, mass-produced consumer goods. This materials revolution meant that the hinge could now disappear, not just visually, but chemically, no longer requiring constant painting or maintenance to prevent rust. It was a liberation from decay. Now for the quirky, pop culture tidbit that emerged from this new material world. With the advent of the nylon hinge came a new, and oddly specific, household problem: the butter knife repair. Cheaply made toys and cabinets used these plastic hinges, and the thin, weak pins holding them would inevitably snap. But the plastic leaves, often press-fit into the wood, were still intact. So, a whole generation of parents and kids discovered a bizarre fix. You'd take a standard metal butter knife from the kitchen drawer, the thin, narrow, dull kind, and carefully heat its tip over the stove burner until it was red hot. Then, you'd quickly, precisely, press the hot metal into the broken plastic pin stump, melting a new, perfectly sized hole. You'd then do the same to the other hinge leaf. Finally, you'd find a suitable replacement pin and nail clip to size, a piece of a coat hanger wire, and voila, the hinge was reborn. It was a triumph of DIY ingenuity over planned obsolescence, a weirdly universal ritual that turned a common kitchen utensil into a specialized repair tool. Historians still argue whether the shift to plastics and other modern materials represented a true advancement or the beginning of a decline in quality and durability. Was the stainless steel hinge on a submarine hatch a worthy successor to the hand-forged iron hinge on a medieval gate? Absolutely. But was the nylon hinge on a 1970 stereo cabinet, the one that broke if you looked at it wrong, really progress, or was it a symbol of a new, disposable culture, where things were designed to be replaced, not repaired? The butter knife fix was a grassroots rebellion against this very idea. It was a testament to the fact that people still believed things should last, even if the manufacturers had other ideas. So as the injection molding machine spits out another batch of pristine white nylon hinges, think of that heated butter knife. It represents a stubborn, human desire for permanence in a world that was increasingly being built to be temporary. The hinge, once a symbol of enduring security, was now on the front lines of a new battle between durability and convenience. The sterile, chemical smell of the mid-century factory melts away, replaced by an even more alien atmosphere. The scent of pure oxygen, burnt rocket fuel, and the faint, metallic tang of fear and absolute focus. The hum of machinery is gone, replaced by the crackle of radio static and the calm, measured voices of mission control. You are no longer on Earth. You are in a clean room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the 1960s. And then, in a dizzying leap, you are in the vacuum of space. The hinge, which has thus far evolved to meet the challenges of architecture, weather, and economics, now faces its most extreme test, functioning in a place utterly hostile to human life. The problems are no longer just squeaking or rust. They are extreme temperature fluctuations, cosmic radiation, and the existential weirdness of zero gravity. Here, a hinge isn't just a convenience. It's a matter of life and death. A failure could mean a door that won't open, a solar panel that won't deploy, or a capsule that can't separate. You are watching a team of engineers, their faces etched with a unique combination of exhaustion and hyper-alertness, test a hinge. But it looks nothing like any hinge you've ever seen. It's a complex, sealed mechanism of specialized alloys and lubricants, mounted on an apparatus that simulates the brutal cold of space as shadow and the blistering heat of direct sunlight. The engineer isn't listening for a squeak. She's monitoring sensors that measure micron-level expansions and contractions of the metal. The problem is thermal cycling. In orbit, a spacecraft can swing from minus to 150 F in the shade to plus to 150 F in the sun every 90 minutes. A standard steel hinge would expand and contract at different rates than its mounting points, creating immense stress, binding up, or simply shattering. The solution? Exotic alloys like titanium or beryllium copper, chosen for their minimal thermal expansion. The lubricant isn't grease. It is a dry film molybdenum disulfide or other solid lubricants that 1T vaporize in a vacuum. or freeze into a solid brick. Every component is baked in ovens to outgas any trapped air or moisture that could later vent and contaminate sensitive optics. This is our mainstream historical fact. The space race of the mid-20th century, particularly the efforts of NASA and other space agencies, drove unprecedented innovation in hinge technology, leading to the development of specialized ultra-reliable hinges, capable of functioning in the vacuum of space and during extreme thermal cycling, and operating in zero-gravity environments. For satellites, landers, and space stations, the Apollo lunar module, for instance, had hinges on its landing legs, and the hatch through which Neil Armstrong took his famous first step, each one a masterpiece of engineering that absolutely could not fail. Now for the quirky, terrifying tidbit from the early days of spaceflight. One of the most critical hinge operations on the Apollo missions was the deployment of the lunar module's landing legs after it separated from the command module. There was a very real and very brief period of panic during the Apollo 11 mission when the LM jettison switched the switch that would explosively separate the two spacecraft if something went wrong was accidentally bumped. The switch was protected by a small, spring-loaded metal hinge cover to prevent such an accident. The hinge on that cover was so perfectly calibrated for zero-gravity operation that the slightest disturbance could flip it open for a few heart-stopping seconds. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were one errant finger poke away from being stranded in lunar orbit. The hinge on a simple plastic switch cover suddenly became the most critically important piece of hardware in the entire mission. After that, future missions added a secondary locking mechanism. It was a stark lesson. In space, there is no such thing as an unimportant hinge. Historians still argue whether the astronomical cost and effort poured into space-grade hinge development produced any meaningful trickle-down benefits for everyday terrestrial hinges, or if it remained an isolated, ultra-high-stakes field of engineering. Did the research into space-age lubricants give us better door hinges? Not really. The requirements are too different. But the mindset did. The rigorous testing protocols, the failure mode analysis, the obsession with materials science, that culture of extreme precision and reliability eventually filtered down into other critical industries, like medical devices and aviation. The space hinge's legacy isn't in our kitchen cabinets. It's in the reliability of the equipment we trust our lives with. So as you lie there, earthbound and comfortable, think of those hinges in the void. They are out there right now, on the International Space Station, on satellites, and on deep space probes, performing their silent, flawless pivots in the absolute silence, a testament to human ingenuity solving problems in an environment that never, ever, gives you a second chance. The vast, silent emptiness of space recedes, its infinite blackness replaced by the soft, pulsating glow of a dozen LED indicators. The scent of rocket fuel and outgassed metals is gone, overpowered by the smell of warm plastic, ozone from cheap circuit boards, and the faint, sweet aroma of a vanilla-scented plug-in air freshener. You are back on Earth, in a very specific kind of Earth, a newly renovated suburban home in the 21st century. The hinge, having conquered gravity, radiation, and vacuum, now faces its most bizarre challenge yet, becoming intelligent. The age of brute strength, of elegant concealment, of space-age alloys, is giving way to the smart era. The goal is no longer just to swing or to hold. It is to sense, to connect, to communicate. The humble hinge is being wired, chipped, and integrated into the Internet of Things, and the results are as convenient as they are faintly ridiculous. You are watching a product designer in a minimalist studio, not a blacksmith in a forge or an engineer in a lab. On the table before her is a prototype for a smart hinge. It looks, at first glance, like a standard, high-quality cabinet hinge, but nestled within its knuckle, almost invisible, is a tiny microchip and a Bluetooth transmitter. This hinge doesn't just allow a door to swing, it reports its position. Is the cabinet door open or closed? The hinge knows. It can tell your phone. It can alert your home security system. It can even notify you if it detects an unusual pattern of movement, say, the cabinet under the sink being opened 10 times in an hour, potentially indicating a leaking pipe being repeatedly mopped up. Next to it is another prototype for a heavier door. This one has a built-in, automatic soft close mechanism, a tiny piston that engages at the last inch of travel, ensuring no door in your house can ever be slammed again. The world of violent, cacophonous door slams, a staple of domestic life for millennia, is being systematically engineered into oblivion. This is our mainstream historical fact. The early 21st century saw the emergence of the smart hinge, integrating microchips, sensors, and connectivity, often Bluetooth or Zigbee, into door hinges, allowing them to function as data points in home automation and security systems, and popularizing features like automated soft close mechanisms. This represents the final step in the hinge's journey from a purely mechanical object to a mechatronic one, a component in a networked digital ecosystem. Now for the quirky, deeply first-world problem tidbit. With the advent of the smart, soft close hinge came a new and oddly specific form of modern frustration: the soft close spoilage. Imagine, you're in a hurry. You need to grab something from a cabinet and go. You give the door a firm, purposeful push to close it, but the hinge, with its infuriating, patronizing patience, ignores your urgency. It catches the door and gently, slowly, it closed at its own leisurely pace. That extra 2 seconds of waiting feels like an eternity. A whole subgenre of online rants and memes has emerged from this phenomenon, with people jokingly lamenting the loss of life's simple catharsis, the satisfying, definitive slam. People have posted videos of themselves dramatically slamming soft close cabinets only to watch them gently, mockingly, ease back open. It's a tiny, trivial war between human impatience and engineered tranquility, and the hinge is the baffled soldier on the front lines. Historians still argue whether this digitization of the hinge represents a natural evolution of function or a solution in desperate search of a problem. Does your medicine cabinet really need to send you a push notification to tell you it's ajar? Or is this merely the logical endpoint of a culture obsessed with quantifying, monitoring, and automating every last aspect of existence, no matter how mundane? The debate rages between technophiles, who see limitless potential, and pragmatists who see unnecessary complexity and new points of failure. After all, a forged iron strap hinge from 1340 can still work perfectly today. Will a Bluetooth-enabled hinge from 2023 even be functional in 10 years? Once the app support is discontinued and the company that made it has been acquired and dissolved, the hinge, once a symbol of timeless reliability, now faces the specter of digital obsolescence. So as the designer taps her screen, watching a real-time graph of the hinge's arc of travel, think of that gentle, inexorable schwung. It's the sound of progress, yes, but it is also the sound of a once simple machine being asked to do far more than just pivot, venturing into a world where its greatest enemy isn't rust or friction, but a dead battery or a corrupted software update. The soft, digital glow of the smart home studio fades, not into darkness, but into a new kind of light, the cool, shimmering luminescence of a holographic display. The scent of plastic and ozone is gone, replaced by something almost imperceptible: the cleanroom smell of molecular assembly. The frantic pace of innovation, of adding chips and sensors, begins to slow. You are no longer in the present. You are at the very frontier of material science, peering into a future where the hinge is undergoing its most fundamental transformation. Since a Mesopotamian smith hammered out that first metal pin, the goal is no longer to add more features, but to reimagine the very essence of the object itself. We are moving beyond mechanics, beyond mechatronics, into the realm of biomimicry and molecular engineering. The hinge of the future might not be a separate part at all. You are in a research lab that looks more like a botanical garden, crossed with a nanotechnology facility. A team of engineers, their eyes reflecting the light of powerful microscopes, is not building a hinge, they are growing one. On one screen, a 3D model rotates a hinge design inspired by the flight mechanics of a dragonfly's wing, a structure that is both incredibly lightweight and impossibly strong, capable of millions of cycles without fatigue. This is biomimicry, not just copying nature, but understanding its deep principles. The hinge isn't an added piece of hardware. It's an integral part of the material, printed or grown at the same time as the door and the frame, a single, continuous piece that flexes at a specific point. In another part of the lab, they're working at a scale so small it defies imagination. They're designing molecular hinges, using proteins and carbon nanotubes that can fold and unfold in response to an electrical charge, or a specific wavelength of light. These wouldn't be for doors, but for medical nanobots, tiny machines that could travel through the bloodstream, their hinged appendages unfolding at the site of a clot or a tumor to deliver a targeted therapy. This is our mainstream historical fact. Current research in biomimicry and nanotechnology is exploring the future of hinges, with scientists studying natural models, like insect wings and seed pods, to create more efficient, durable, and integrated designs, and experimenting with molecular-scale hinges for applications in medicine and robotics. This represents a shift from assembly to genesis, from creating a part to designing a material with inherent movement. Now for the quirky, philosophical tidbit that emerges from this far future thinking as we approach the possibility of true molecular scale hinges. A bizarre ethical debate has begun to simmer in academic circles. At what point does a hinge stop being a hinge? If a door is made of a smart material that flexes open without a distinct pivot point, is it still a door? Or is it an aperture? If a nanobot's tool arm unfolds via a complex protein reaction, is that a hinge or a chemical process? It's a debate that would have made a medieval blacksmith laugh until he cried, but it gets to the very heart of how we define the objects in our world. We are approaching a horizon where the function of a hinge creating a pivot may remain, while the physical object we've called a hinge for millennia may simply disappear, absorbed into the very fabric of the things it once served. Historians still argue whether this trajectory points toward a final, utopian perfection of the hinge's form or its eventual obsolescence. Will the hinge, as a distinct invention, simply vanish, its function seamlessly integrated until it is as invisible as the structure of a crystal? Or will there always be a need for that simple, reliable, mechanical pivot, a technology so perfect in its simplicity that it simply cannot be improved upon, only replaced by something more complex and potentially more fragile? The answer likely lies in the middle. The iron strap hinge will still swing on a barn door for centuries to come, while a surgeon uses a nanobot with a molecular hinge to repair a brain aneurysm. The history of the hinge doesn't end, it branches, its story continuing along every path we have walked tonight. And as we reach the end of this long, quiet journey together, it's time to let these thoughts go. The images of smithies and space stations, of cathedral doors and nanobot labs, can all begin to soften now, to blur at the edges and lose their sharpness. You've traveled thousands of years and crossed continents, all without moving an inch. The humble hinge, the thing you never think about, has proven to have a story deeper and wider than anyone could have possibly imagined. It's a story of human ingenuity, of our endless desire to make things easier, safer, and more beautiful. It's a story written in stone, in iron, in brass, and in code. But that story is over for now. The screen door in the summer breeze, the gentle sigh of the soft closed cabinet, the massive, silent swing of a bank vault, these are the echoes of that history. The quiet, everyday miracles we simply accept. So let them go. Let the pins and the pivots, the straps and the springs, all fade back into the darkness where they belong. There is no more need to focus. There is only the gentle weight of the covers, the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, and the soft, distant hum of the world outside your door, a door that, thanks to 5,000 years of innovation, closes quietly behind you, keeping you safe and warm and perfectly at peace. Let everything become still. Let the silence inside you grow deeper than any tomb, quieter than any cathedral, more peaceful than the void of space itself. You are here. You are safe. The night is deep, and rest is waiting, gentle and endless, just on the other side of a breath.